Hello and welcome to another episode of the Charles Houston Bar Association's Law Club podcast. Today, we are pleased to have former CHBA President Terry Wiley joining us. And Terry is currently running for Alameda County District Attorney, and we're very happy to have him on the program. Terry is currently the Chief Assistant District Attorney at the Alameda County DA's office, where he's been for 32 years. And he's also on the Board of Trustees for the State Bar of California. He's on the Criminal Justice Standards Committee for the American Bar Association. He's also on the board of the National Bar Association, as well as the California Association of Black Lawyers. So Terry, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure, Nate. It's always a pleasure to do anything associated with the Charles Houston Bar Association. I do have to correct one thing you said. I'm not currently on the State Bar of California Board of Trustees. My term ended, so I'm not currently on there.
Okay, great. But you've been so active. I mean, I remember when I first joined CHBA, maybe about 5 years or so ago, you were always like the big brother to us. I mean, a lot of people come into an organization like CHBA and stick around for a couple years and then go off and do other things, which I understand because everybody's so busy. But what is it about well, we'll start with CHBA that keeps you engaged year after year?
Nate, it's funny. When I joined the district attorney's office, you're prosecuting cases every day, and in the case of the Alameda County DA's office, I was assigned to the Oakland courthouse, and many of the people that we were coming into contact with looked just like me, and so I thought that for purposes of my career, it was important to get involved in on the more positive side of the law with organizations like the Charles Houston Bar Association. And once I got involved with Charles Houston, just like you said, I have been like a big brother to you and others that come into the organization. There were folks that were in that same position when I got to the Charles Houston Bar Association. And so you meet people like George Holland and John Burris and Bob Harris. These were the individuals that were still actively associated with the Charles Houston Bar Association and really gave us guidance as young lawyers. And I never forgot that. And, and I felt that, as I got older and more established in my career, it was important to fill the same role that they filled for me. And so I think it's important for lawyers like myself who've been around for 30 plus years to remain involved and show some leadership so that you guys have somebody to lean on. So it's important.
32 years is an incredible amount of time for anybody to stay in with any organization. It's very rare these days. What is it about the Alameda County District Attorney's office that has kept you there for so long?
Well, Nate, when I got to the DA's office, and I tell everyone this, that my goal when I got there was to stay 5 years and go into private practice and really focus on making money, because I'm the youngest of 12 kids. I came from very challenging economic circumstances, and that we didn't have any money, and it had just been kind of drilled in me that education was my way out to a better life. And so I wanted that better life for myself and my family. But then I got to the DA's office, and so really what has kept me there for 32 years is the work, because what I didn't anticipate was, I knew that as prosecutors you try to seek justice on cases, but you really don't know what justice really looks like until you get there, because what it looks like when you're in law school and you take criminal law, what it looks like is the prosecutor prosecutes someone who's committed a crime. they don't really, you don't really focus on the impact that the crime has had on the victim and how the work that you're doing can impact the victim and the victim's family's lives, and how many times a victim of crime can't even begin to move forward with their life and begin the healing until the criminal case is over. And so it was the impact that, the work was having on the lives of victims and on the communities of Alameda County that I determined that that was my calling, that that was the work that I wanted to spend my career doing. I felt it was important work. And I also felt that at the time I entered the Alameda County DA's office, in the upper echelons of the DA's office, it was all predominantly white males making all the policy decisions, and deciding who got assigned where, just making all the decisions of our criminal justice system. And I wanted that to change. I wanted to see a more diverse voice at the top of the Alameda County DA's office. And so I felt it was important for me to stay there and eventually be the voice of our criminal justice system.
And because you have such a depth of experience with this community and the ADA's, the Alameda County District Attorney's Office, what are some of the biggest shifts that you've seen over the course of your career in terms of the types of prosecutorial decisions that are made, and the way in which your the DA's office has shifted in their thinking over the past couple decades?
Well, I think it's a combination of the shift that I've seen inside the DA's office, but the shift that I've also seen in society and in the citizenry of Alameda County. The first change that I saw, when I first started, literally I could pick a jury, and anything a police officer said to the jury was the gospel. Juries universally believed everything police officers said. And then in 1991, which was my second year in the DA's office, and in fact, me and Kamala Harris started together in the Alameda County DA's office. And when the Rodney King case happened in 1991, me and Kamala were assigned at the same courthouse. And I remember the day that the verdict came back when the case was first tried in Simi Valley, and the police officers were acquitted, despite the video. It shook me, and what was I doing there as a district attorney? And I know it also shook Kamala, because my particular office looked out onto the street. Out the window of my office, it looked out onto the street. And I was standing there kind of numb, looking out my window. And lo and behold, walking down the sidewalk in tears was Kamala Harris, walking towards the parking garage. And so, I saw in real time the impact the verdict was having on her, and I know how I felt. And so that was the first time I began to see change in the criminal justice system, at least the way that society looked at the testimony of police officers. Then, of course, there have been a series of incidents since then, and until it culminated in the George Floyd case, where it was the George Floyd case, and that I think that has had the biggest impact in my 32 years, because we were in the middle of COVID. Everybody's home. Everybody has multiple sources of media. So as long as you had a TV, you were going to see what happened to George Floyd, no matter what channel you watched. And I think that case resonated so deeply, not only in the United States, but around the world. And that's where we began to see a lot of the institutions acknowledge that there's got to be some change. Now, prior to that, and I know I'm getting a little long-winded in this answer, but prior to that, we've always been a fairly progressive area, particularly in San Francisco and Oakland. And there's always been an acknowledgement that you have to try and find alternatives to just simply incarcerating folks. So we've always been open to developing alternatives to incarceration. But since the George Floyd case, I've even seen a greater focus and emphasis on finding alternatives and changes in the bail system so that the bail system does not rely exclusively on a person's monetary ability to for it to be the sole determiner of whether a person stays in custody or not. So those are some real institutional changes. Now, those have had some, the effects of that have been multifaceted, let me say, in terms of the public's reaction to the current bail system.
And I assume that, working within a chain of command, there are always times where maybe you'd like to zig where other folks are zagging, but ultimately, because you are in that chain of command at the DA's office, I'm certain that there have been times in your career where you've had to fall in line. The position that you are running for would put you at the top of that chain of command, or at least working with the mayor and other local partners in terms of how things are carried out. And I'm wondering, if you have the opportunity to lead the DA's office. You talked about changes to the bail system. What are some of your top priorities in terms of the the policy platforms that you would hope to implement if you're given that opportunity?
Well, one, of course, is I've always tried to, I've always felt that the system was unfair to people of color. And it was reflected in anytime you look at the data, you look at who's being prosecuted, you look at who's being arrested. And I'll just use marijuana as one example. During the 90s, when myself and Kamala Harris started, marijuana was, it was illegal to possess marijuana. But despite data showing that marijuana use between whites and African Americans was practically the same, we saw a disproportionate number of African Americans being prosecuted for marijuana offenses. And most of that was attributed to because there was a disproportionate number of African Americans being stopped by the police. Despite data showing that you were more likely to find somebody white with illegal drugs than you were African Americans. And so my top priority is to address the disparities in the system. And you can do that as the elected district attorney of Alameda County, because you can have a conversation with police agencies that are bringing in a disproportionate number of cases involving African Americans and ask the question, why? Why is so many African Americans being arrested and brought in, for example, back in the day for marijuana cases? They're not the only ones using marijuana. And I just think that, so one of my priorities is to really tackle the disparities in our criminal justice system at the juvenile level and at the adult level to make it a more balanced system of justice.
And, a lot of times when you hear people running for office, not necessarily prosecutors, but mayors, governors, presidents, you hear folks talking about being tough on crime. But I think part of what I'm hearing you saying is that there's a balancing act between being tough on crime and also being committed to justice and committed to being fair in the system. And I'm curious to hear how you balance those two objectives of making sure folks who have committed serious crimes, face consequences, and then also making sure folks who maybe they got maybe they don't have the resources to adequately defend their case, or maybe they committed an offense that, while serious, there's still redeeming things about that person, and you'd like to see them have an opportunity to move on with their life after a conviction. How do you kind of balance those two objectives?
Well, that's exactly the question that I asked myself when I decided to run for district attorney. Was, what do I stand for? And what I have always stood for is one system of justice, a system of justice that is fair to everyone, regardless of your race, creed, color, gender, sexual orientation. It does not matter. Everybody should receive equal treatment when they come through our system of justice. And I also understand that, on the one side, you have people that are concerned with safety. And many think that, if you are concerned with safety, that you are compromising safety if you want to incorporate a healthy dose of social justice into the criminal justice system. And there are also many on the social justice side who think that if you want safety, then you're going to compromise the social justice aspect by having more safety. And what my campaign stands for, which is why our theme is one justice for all, is that you can have social justice in our criminal justice system, and it does not have to be at the expense of safety. And you can have safety, and it doesn't have to be at the expense of social justice. And so what we offer in our campaign is that effective balance that focuses on the disparities, because we understand that when you take a father out of the community, away from his family, because he possessed, a half a pound of marijuana, for example, you are doing more damage to society because you now have children that are grown up without their father. You have an income that is no longer going to that household. And as opposed to at least trying to find an alternative to taking that father out of the community and away from his family. And you try to find alternatives to work with them. And now I think that, and so I really think that when you look at a lot of the lower level criminal offenses, that it is important that we find alternatives to incarceration to try and get people on a different trajectory. Because in the end, you do more damage to the community when you take them out of the community. And, during the 1990s and the first decade of 2000, there was just a lot of mass incarcerating going on. And it had a tremendous negative impact on many communities of color, because there were voices and there were role models that were taken out of the community for offenses that really alternatives should have been found to those offenses. And so that is what we're going to tackle. Now, at the same time, when it comes to the more serious and violent felonies like murder, kidnapping, robbery, with use of firearms, well, it's more difficult to find an alternative to incarcerating when you pose a physical threat to the community. And let's face it, right now, there are people who are concerned about even going to the store for fear of being shot on the freeway, or being in the store when there's a mass retail takeover robbery of the store. These are things that, from a law enforcement perspective, we got to deal with. And it's much more, you tie our hands when you're committing these kinds of criminal offenses and then expect some alternative. I mean, I think in my case, the reality is is that, you know, of all the cities in the Bay Area, you know, Oakland has traditionally had the highest murder rate. It's had the highest rate of violent crime. And, you know, as the elected district attorney of Alameda County, I have a clear strategy of how we're going to deal with that. Because, you know, at the end of the day, you can bring a lot of social justice ideas to the criminal justice system. But if people don't feel safe coming out of their homes, it's not going to be effective, and you're not going to be able to garner a lot of support for those policies if people don't feel safe coming out of their houses. So you've got to tackle the murder rate and the violent crime that occurs in Oakland.
Absolutely. And you talk about people being feeling safe in their community. And part of that can come from the perspective of how individuals in certain neighborhoods feel about their interactions with police. And I know that you've been very active in putting on Know Your Rights presentations and helping people feel more comfortable around the police. I'm wondering if you've also been involved in terms of working with police officers in terms of and police departments in terms of helping shape those interactions between police officers and the community to help both sides feel more at ease, because at the end of the day, police officers just want to go home to their families just like everyone else. And it's a sense of how do we help you know, community members and police officers feel more comfortable interacting with each other.
Yeah, you know, I have, and you know, it's interesting because, you know, as you stated, I've been involved with the National Bar Association, which is the largest, oldest African-American bar association in the United States and actually in the world. And when the Michael Brown case occurred in 2015, you know, there was a lot of discussion. Well, how do we respond to this? You know, and I think what really stood out in the Michael Brown case, in addition to the fact that this young man was shot and killed, but what resonated, I think, with a lot of people was when they left his body lying out in the street uncovered for several hours. I mean, that image was never lost on a lot of people around the country. And so instead of, you know, my thought was, well, you know, I think that this is an opportunity for us as lawyers to really go into our communities and start educating our kids and all kids on how to interact with law enforcement. And so I was one of the biggest, well, I mean, I don't want to say I created it by myself because I didn't, but I was one of the leaders that helped create the Know Your Rights, It Can Save Your Life program, where we went to 25 cities around the United States doing Know Your Rights programs, pretty much focusing primarily on young teenagers and young adults, and getting them to understand their constitutional rights, and having them and explain to them, you know, what are the best things to do when you're interacting or being stopped by law enforcement, and knowing when you should stop and interact with law enforcement, and knowing when you have a right not to if you don't want to. And, you know, it's funny, Nate, because many of the, you know, we went to Brooklyn, New York, Miami, we went to Jackson, Mississippi. I mean, we went all over the country. And after each Know Your Rights program, we would have parents come up to us after the program and just thank us and say, you know, everything you said to my child in this program is what we've been trying to tell them, but they won't listen to us as parents. And it's great to have somebody come and talk to them. But what was interesting about the Know Your Rights programs, initially law enforcement was like, no, we're not getting involved with that, because they thought it was kind of an anti-law enforcement program. But then they started hearing about it in the community and how everybody was saying how positive it was. And then the next thing I know, we would approach law enforcement and they're like, yes, we would love to participate. So when we really got going with the Know Your Rights programs, law enforcement partnered with us in doing the presentations. And you know, they really turned into very, very effective ways of bringing the law enforcement community together with the people in the community. And I'll never forget, we did a program in Oakland, and we had a number of Oakland police officers and kids from the community. And one of the officers said to me after, he said, you know, I've been a police officer for 5 years, and that was the first time I spoke with people in the community without it being associated with my job as a police officer. And I'll tell you another quick story. So we had a young lady whose brother had been shot, and he survived, but he was left very physically damaged. And she was upset with law enforcement because they never solved the case. And after that event, and she told her story, a police officer reached out to her and said, hey, why don't you come on a ride along with me? And so to this day, that officer has been a mentor to that young woman after she did that ride along with the officer. And those are the kinds of relationships that we were hoping would come out of this, because I think those are the kinds of programs that bring it causes the community to have a greater sense of trust when you get to know somebody, and they're not, and the police are not seeing the community as the enemy, and the community, importantly, is not seeing every police officer as the enemy. Because, you know, let's face it, in many Black communities, I remember telling a CHP officer who we were having some policy discussions, and he asked me, he says, Terry, so do people in the community really think that police officers are the enemy? I said, look, in white communities, people think the police are there to protect them. I said, in many Black communities, people think the police are there to get them. And I said, that's the perception that needs to change with law enforcement. And I've done, and that's what I've done throughout my career in the DA's office. And, you know, because I did not want my career to just be about prosecuting people. I wanted to make a difference. And I'll just say this one last thing, because it's probably one of my proudest moments as a DA, was I was notified by the National Bar Association in 2020 that I was receiving the Heman Sweat Civil Rights Award. And, you know, I just never thought that when I became a DA, that there would be a day that I'd be receiving a civil rights award for my work as a DA. And so that was an award that told me that I had done something right with my career to receive that award. And I was the first prosecutor in the history of the National Bar Association to receive the Heman Sweat Civil Rights Award.
Well, that's incredible, and I think it's very clear from, you know, some of what you've talked about, what your current motivation and inspiration are for the work that you do. I'm curious, if we go all the way back, you said you're one of the youngest of 12 kids. And I think, if I recall, you and your brother might have been the first of those 12 to go to college. Is that correct?
We were the first to go to college and graduate.
Okay. And what you know, what was it about you and your brother, or what was it for you and your brother that helped you know, put you in a position to, you know, be the first of your siblings to graduate college? And then what inspired you to go on to law school and become a prosecutor?
Yeah, well, no, that's a great question, Nate. I was always inspired by, because, I was born in 1960. So I got to see some of the, by the time I began to understand what was going on, which was about 1968 is when I started kind of paying attention. And it probably began with, seeing clips of Martin Luther King and not completely understanding what was going on historically. But I always just remember being drawn to his oratory skills. Like no matter where I was, he could stop me in his tracks when I would hear Martin Luther King giving a speech. And so I always was kind of drawn to him. And then of course as I got older, I was drawn to what he stood for and what his mission was. But also just hearing stories of Thurgood Marshall and understanding that as a lawyer, uh, there were things that he did that made my life better. Hearing about Brown versus the Board of Education and how, as I sat in class, my life was better because of what he did as a lawyer. So that always in the back of my mind, whenever I thought about what I wanted to do, even at a young age, I thought, I want to be a lawyer. And so one day, and this is such a true story. Me and my brother, it was in the summer, me and my brother came in from playing, and my mother calls us in the kitchen. And so we look at each other, and I'm like, did you do something? And then he's looking at me, did I do something? Like, are we in trouble? Why is she calling us? You know, so she calls us into the kitchen and she says, sit down at the table. And she's like kind of yelling at us, and we're like, God, what do we do? And she says, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I just immediately said, I want to be a lawyer. And then she looked at my twin brother and said, I don't know. I don't know what I want to be. And so then he wound up getting the wrath of the conversation because she said, well, you're not getting up from the table till you tell me what you want to be. And, I never forgot that. I never forgot that day. Because as I went through school and as I was going through high school, it was kind of drilled in my mind that everything I'm doing, even in high school, I want to go to college. I'm from college. I want to go to law school. I want to be a lawyer. So I'd say from probably the age of 14, man, my path was set on what I wanted to do.
And did you play football in college?
I did.
And
I
so
did.
how I assume like anybody who plays football at that level, it's you talked about your commitment to to going to college and to becoming a lawyer. There's an equal commitment when you talk about playing Division I football. And I'm wondering, how did you, was there ever a point in time where you believed that maybe football was the direction that you were going to go?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. So, me and my brother, fortunately, were blessed with, a lot of athletic talent. And, we knew that there was that possibility of, we also had a goal of going to the NFL. I played at Cal, my brother played at UCLA. And, and those were, I played during the era of Charles White, Marcus Allen, and there was just great football players on the West Coast. And so, and there were a lot of players going into the NFL from the it was the Pac-10 at that time, from the Pac-10. And yeah, so and I was a starting running back for Cal. And so I definitely had visions of going to the NFL. I just didn't know that, I also had bad knees. And so I had knee injuries. And I think a lot of that all contributed to my not ultimately making it into the NFL. But at the same time, I had my fallback position in that,
Absolutely.
I still had my goal of wanting to be an attorney. So for, the first 2 years after I graduated, I was trying out for different teams and trying to get into the NFL. And then one day, uh, my stepfather said, "Hey, look, you know, how much longer are you gonna mess around with football and get on with your life?" And I listened to that. I said, "Yeah, I agree with you. It's time for me to move on." In the NFL, you hear those rare stories of somebody who's hung in there for 3 or 4 years and they finally make it on an NFL roster. Well, the NFL, you learn, is a league that uh, if you don't make it right away, either through being drafted or having an unbelievable um, training camp as a free agent, then you better start having a fallback position. And those stories of where you've heard of someone hanging in there and making it after 4 or 5 years, those are rare stories. But at the same time, I have a lot of respect for those players that were able to show that fortitude and hang in there and make it. Nate, I think that my experience, my athletic experience, also contributed to a lot of my success
Absolutely.
as a lawyer and in my career as a lawyer, because there are some things that you do as a football player that are some of the hardest things you'll ever do in your life, you know. And so when you get kind of into the real world, some of the things that people find challenging, I look at it like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
You know, they're not nearly as challenging as some of the other things I've had to face as an athlete.
Absolutely. I mean, trials are tough, but they're not two-a-days.
Yeah,
And
they're
I
not.
assume, I played high school football in the 90s and we still had two-a-days, but I assume that they weren't anything like football practice in the 70s. I mean,
Well,
or the
well, we had a
80s.
coach. We had our head coach Roger Theater at Cal, and we were in training camp. It was 103 degrees, wearing pads, and it was still during this era where football coaches did not believe in giving you a lot of access to water because they thought being tough was, hey, toughen it out without drinking water and wait till after practice to drink water. It was still that mentality. And so it's after practice. We still haven't had he still hasn't let us break to go drink water. And everybody is thirsty and we just want him to stop talking so we can go get some water. And he looks at us and says, "Guys, isn't this the greatest thing? I mean, is there any other place you'd rather be than here?" And I think collectively we said, he must be out of his damn mind. Yeah, there's a whole lot of better places I can think of than being here at 103-degree temperature, completely exhausted and dehydrated.
It, and you talked about, well, I'll try to make this the last football question, but you talked about your brother being at UCLA while you were at Cal. Was he on the offensive side of the ball or the
No,
defensive
he was
side of the
on
ball?
defense. He was on
Okay, so
defense,
did
and
you
it was
guys
funny.
ever go head to head in
Yeah, we
college? Because
did.
you're both in the Pac-10.
Yeah, we did. And in fact, he was in the defensive backfield with Kenny Easley was the safety at UCLA at that time. And I mean, UCLA had some great ball players at that time. Unfortunately, when UCLA came to Cal, they beat us, and my mother was always like, "Well, son, it doesn't matter who won." And of course my brother is just talking so much noise. So we would, and I mean, to this day, when UCLA plays Cal, we go at it, you know. So yeah, no, but it was a great experience. Great experience.
Awesome. Well, you've been so gracious with your time. I've got a couple lightning round questions. Some of these we've already gotten to, so I'll skip over some of them, but I'll get right to it. I got about 10 questions for you, and then we'll wrap up.
Okay.
All right. So you're hosting a visitor from out of town, and they want a taste of the Bay Area. What's the restaurant that you're taking them to?
Well, if they want barbecue, I'm gonna take them to Everett and Jones.
There you go.
And yeah, so I'm gonna take them to Everett and Jones.
All right. What's the best concert you've ever gone to in person?
The best concert that I've ever been to is Frankie Beverly and Mays at the National Bar Association annual convention, where they gave a private concert for our membership. It was the best concert I've ever been to in my life.
Who has been the one person early in your legal career who helped you out the most?
The Honorable Joan Cartwright. Judge Joan Cartwright was a huge mentor to me. And she was actually a district attorney at the time before she got appointed to the bench, but she immediately took me and Kamala Harris and a lot of us under her wing, and she had a tremendous impact on us.
Who is the best defense attorney that you've ever seen in court?
The best defense attorney. That's a tough question because I've seen a lot of good defense attorneys. But I would probably say, man, the best defense attorney. Okay, I think there have been a lot of really good defense attorneys, but the smoothest defense attorney that I've saw, the way they operated in the courtroom was, and people are going to say I'm biased because we're friends, but John Burris was the smoothest defense attorney I've seen in my career. And the way he came into the courtroom and the way he operated with the DA's office and the way he comported himself with the court, one of the best I've seen in my career.
A perfect day for you includes what activity?
Perfect day. Being able to complete a 2-hour workout.
Wow. Still.
And yeah, that's the perfect day for me.
All right. And if you were not an attorney, what would you be doing right now?
I would have my own business and I would be an entrepreneur.
And at the let's say you are elected Alameda County District Attorney, how will you measure success by the end of your term?
Two things. One, I will measure by the reduction in violent crime, particularly in Oakland, but in Alameda County. I want the level of violent crime to be reduced dramatically. And secondly, I want to see reductions in the rates of disparity at all levels of the system. That is where I'm going to measure my administration by.
I think that's a great place to end. Terry Wiley, thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you for all that you do for us in the CHBA community and in Alameda County, and wishing you the best of luck with your race for the Alameda County District Attorney.
And Nate, let me end by just saying that with the Charles Houston Bar Association, I think people can see with individuals like yourself and many of the individuals that are currently running the Charles Houston Bar Association, I cannot tell you how impressed I am with the level of talent, the level of commitment from young African-American lawyers towards the mission of the Charles Houston Bar Association. And it fills my heart to see what good hands the organization is in. So thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right. Appreciate it, Terry. Have a great day and enjoy the Super Bowl.
All right. You too, Nate. Talk to you later.
Take care.
All right.